Good morning, I'm Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. Going to spend some time talking to you about you and your business. You know, we're doing an ongoing series on mid-market companies and what you need to know about them, and continuing that series with Laura Rusick, and she's with a company called, I think it's called OpSolutions. Yes, OpSolutions, optimizing process, managing technology. Welcome to the program. How are you today?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. OpSolutions, OPT Solutions Inc.com is the website. Tell us a little bit about OpSolutions.
So, Kevin, we find that IT has a big impact on all facets of mid-sized businesses, and OPT Solutions really helps with the IT management side of that equation. So we're helping CEOs typically figure out what to do with technology, how do you leverage it, and we'll help them either on an ongoing fractional basis or on a particular project, such as helping them select software or doing assessments of their areas.
Kind of give me a little bit of the history of the company.
Sure. So I spent 12 years managing IT departments before I started the business, and I found over time, and I know we'll talk about this, that my preference really over time evolved from large enterprise companies that I'd worked with to mid-market. There's just some really interesting, unique challenges in the mid-market space. And so we started, this is our 8th year in business now, and it evolved, but it's still been in the same niche the whole time, because it's really, we don't resell products, we don't try to put boots on the ground as far as trying to configure networks or program things like that. We're really looking at it from the IT leadership and management level.
Yeah, very good, very good. Kind of give me an overview. What would you say is your sweet spot? You mentioned mid-market, but where
Sure.
specifically, revenue-wise and vertical-wise is your sweet spot?
Mm-hmm. So we're typically in the category of 10 million to 500 million. We find that manufacturers get involved with us a little later in the game, and services organizations, nonprofits, earlier in the game, which kind of talks a little bit to your industry question, vertical question. We really don't have specific verticals. We do a lot in the manufacturing sector, but we also do a lot in the services sector. We have healthcare backgrounds, so we're pretty well-rounded, and find that knowledge about other industries can really benefit an industry that hasn't had that input because, for example, they haven't had regulatory pressure and so haven't really given us much thought to security or to a different way of doing business. In some cases, that can be more efficient for the business, not to just add layers of administration, but to really be more efficient for the business and protect the business.
Talk a little bit about the difference between the needs and the differences between mid-market and enterprise-level companies and really what the difference is in terms of their needs.
Sure. It's one of my favorite topics, actually. Having actually started out in the enterprise space, it's really interesting because when you do projects in the enterprise space, you can take a group of people out of their day-to-day jobs, backfill those with other people, and dedicate them to a project, for example. In the mid-market space, people rarely have that luxury, especially having gone through the Great Recession, right? And people have cut back resources, they're running lean, they're running mean from a business standpoint. And they don't have people to just take out and say, well, you don't have a whole lot you're doing anyway, let's put you on this project. So one of the things that we're, frankly pretty good at is managing part-time resources on projects, and that becomes really crucial. The other thing is that mid-market companies, they don't typically have resources dedicated to research. So it's particularly interesting in the IT space, the technology space, because you have a lot of these folks looking to getting information from vendors. And while that can be very helpful, you have to remember that those vendors have a vested interest in that game, right?
Right.
So the likelihood of them getting completely unbiased information is pretty darn small.
Right. Right. So how large is your company? Would it be considered a mid-market company?
I would say we're considered a small business. We have employees as well as a network of consultants that we use because our projects really do flex. One of the things that's important to the mid-market is flexibility. if people's business goals change rapidly, we've got to be able to position and readjust, and that's part of our game and how we operate with our clients.
Yeah, very cool. Laura, I appreciate your insight. What would you say is the situation in terms of mid-market companies and their desire to be enterprise-level companies? A lot of people assume that the only reason why they're not enterprise is they just haven't grown there yet. But I think a lot of business consciously decide to stay the size they are.
It's a really interesting question. We find there's a lot of family businesses out there, in particular, who are in the mid-market space, who aren't necessarily looking to be enterprise businesses. They want to grow, but they have a measured growth plan for that, which is great. And at the same time, they also, they're interested in not necessarily that end event, right? They're not necessarily interested in selling or getting a private equity investment. They're interested in turning that over to the next generation. Now, that's not true for all. Every organization's different. But that's one of the interesting things about working with CEOs and the work that we do, where you don't normally have access to the enterprise level, I'd add. If you were talking to me and that my enterprise level customers were my base, we wouldn't even be having that conversation, right? I wouldn't have insight to that level. So that's another thing we love about the mid-market.
Yeah.
I think from that mid-market standpoint, there are certainly companies that aspire to be enterprise level, but others are really happy with their cash flow. They're really happy with the investments that they want to make, and they're interested and they're change-oriented in a lot of cases, which we love. But at the same time, they don't want to take a ton of risk and create a situation where their life becomes unstable, I think, in some cases.
Yeah, no question about it. Very interesting conversation, and I appreciate you spending time talking to us about it. Any final thoughts before I let you go?
No, other than the fact that if, as you see enterprise-level vendors trying to get into the mid-market space, it's a significant impact to both our economy as well as just growth in general. It's a great space to be in. We love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you shared your love for what you do. It's a great segment, and I want the listener to learn more about your company. Check out optsolutionsinc.com, optsolutionsinc.com. And Laura, I appreciate your time. Laura Rusick, and again, great conversation, great topic.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me.
You want to remind the listeners that the best content here shows up over there at usdatareview.com. While there, like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter, and also want to remind you the show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. More for you right after this on The Price of Business.